from New Jersey, this is Low Fidelity. I'm Jeff Heller.
And I'm Mike LeBrie. On this episode, we will be discussing ambitious projects in popular music.
You can support Low Fidelity by reviewing us on iTunes, subscribing to us on our Reddit and YouTube channels, and by following @Lo-Fi Podcast on Twitter.
All the links you need are in the description of this episode, but you are always welcome to share any feedback directly with us in the comments or via email, feedback@lowfidelity.info.
Welcome to Low Fidelity. We're glad to have you back with us. And since we just reviewed Fleetwood Mac's Tusk on the last episode, we felt it would make sense if we continued on this path of talking about ambitious projects by discussing what it means to have an ambitious project and looking at a few examples in popular music. Now, this is going to be, I would say, part one, because I think this is a topic we can constantly go back to with other examples. And while we'll use this first episode to discuss what it means to have an ambitious project, that might take some time. Really, the examples are going to be what spotlight the main ideas that we want to gather from this topic. Maybe sometime in the future we'll do part two and on from there. I'm sure there's plenty of examples you can find from your side of things, Mike.
Absolutely. We'll consider this an intro to the topic, and then part one from Jeff's side. I already have a full outline in my head of what a part two from Mike's genres of music could be. There's a lot to say here, so we'll get the discussion going and we'll come back around to it.
All right, before we get started, I just want to define the term popular music. There could be some confusion between popular music and pop music.
Yeah.
The term itself means music meant for a wide audience,
right?
Which is what the ambitious part of it is going to interact with. It's meant for a wide audience, but it's really alienating at times, and that does depend on the kind of projects we're going to talk about.
Yeah, obviously there could be a single person in their garage that worked on an album for 30 years and it finally came out and 5 people listened to it. That's not a popular music ambitious project. That's just an ambitious project by someone, not truly meant for that giant wide mainstream audience.
Right, maybe meant for a smaller audience or just for friends or whatnot. Very true. I want to start with something that I tend to do out of nowhere, and that is come up with random quotable things. I actually have a note, and there's not a lot in it, but it's something where I'll see something and then make an observation about it. And I have a couple of these that I've used before.
Hey, you're just looking for the right opportunity to use it?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
It is the difference between stupidity and bravery is the result. Especially with stunts, that's where you have to ask yourself if they fall and hit themselves, cause some kind of damage, or
like, oh, that was dumb.
Was that dumb or was it brave?
Right.
Because the only difference is what happens afterwards. All right, so we're going to see if that makes any sense. But before we get into any examples here, let's just discuss what makes a project ambitious in popular music. So I want to start with you on this, Mike.
Okay.
When you think of a band that says, oh, we're going to do something really out there, really different, we want to make this a special thing.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that? And of course, it's going to depend on the project, but in general, your favorite band says they're going to do this big thing, different from what they've done before. What do you take from that?
So in this scenario, you're saying that the band or the group, they're already publicly saying, this is going to be different, this is going to be unique. And then as a fan, what is the response there? I guess it really depends on what is my familiarity with them up to that point. How long have I been with them? If it's a band I've been with for 4, 5, 6 albums, at that point, you're usually ready for them to try something different. If it's a band I don't really know a whole lot about, especially if it's a band who's only had one album and then they go, oh, we're going to be crazy and do something entirely different. Like, well, okay, great. You haven't really shown what your creativity base is to begin with. So how do I know this is truly unique or ambitious for you?
That's funny you bring up the perspective, though, of bands who have done similarly the same thing for a couple of albums. When they go and say, I'm going to do something different, that's actually exciting.
It can be, yeah.
You've seen them do this thing over and over. It's actually time for a change.
Well, and you hope so, because if you're a fan of someone for that long, you tend to think there's something of artistic merit and value to them that you would like to see them explore. But there's also a bunch of bands, if I want to throw out there, Newfound Glory, a band that I listened to for a very long time and got very samey. And then when they tried to do something different, I think all I wanted from you was those good old days. And I'm not feeling whatever you're doing now. And I don't want you to go back to that. Thank you. It's been a nice ride. Good day, sir.
So then when they're saying, we're going to do something very different this time, we're going to go back to our roots. In a lot of cases, we see that,
the back to the roots thing is an entire subject in and of itself.
That's very true, too. But I mean, it's kind of ambitious when you think of, instead of going the route of doing what they normally do, they instead take this 180-degree turn and do something completely different.
Yeah, it's exciting, but I think they also need to be careful about the way they describe it, because if they start overselling it, you get into the hype here. If they're overselling, overhyping it, it's, well, can that ever truly live up to to what they're describing.
I wonder if this also differs because going back to our music discovery episode where we got categorized as two different people.
Sure.
Me as the songsmith, where my outreach into musical genres and artists is very varied. When I hear about an artist doing something ambitious, to me, it's almost like, oh, geez, now I got to go and get used to this. Or I might already be prepared for that because I've already listened to other types of music.
That's true. It could be one of only two things. It's I listen to so much stuff already that I'm already intimately familiar with, or whatever you think you're going to do is new and unique.
Or I'm worried that they're going to do that thing terribly because I've already heard bands of that other type of music before, and they're going to come and do, like, if someone says, oh, I'm going to make a movie. Well, okay, look, I've seen the Moonwalker movie of Michael Jackson's. I've seen Hard Day's Night by the Beatles.
Sure.
Like, really, what are you going to do in a movie? I haven't seen Glitter or,
sure.
some of the bad examples, I guess you could say. But now, having said all of that, what are some of the things that go into an ambitious project? Because what would be, let's first start with what's the most basic example of an artist making an album, right? They're just crafting a bunch of songs.
Sure.
They're going into a studio or their basement with a laptop, whatever, recording the songs, putting it out, and that's it. What then makes a project ambitious in comparison to that?
I mean, the different routes you could go, different genre, different instrumentation, bringing in different collaborators. I mean, there's all sorts of different avenues you can take to kind of like boost that external/internal creativity to break out of there a little bit.
Mm-hmm. With doing some of these changes, there's a little bit of risk involved, right? Because if you're going to be doing a new sound, you're trusting that you can actually represent that sound in a unique way, possibly alienating as well. Because if the sound that you're putting out is very much unlike what you've done before, that audience that you've brought with you now has to go and leave. I'm going to side note to an interesting example here, and I'm not going to get into it in full. Maybe we'll do this as an example later.
Okay.
But I was listening to a podcast called Velocities in Music, and they were talking about Radiohead's discography, and they mentioned how with OK Computer, they said that they brought in this massive audience so that when they stepped into Kid A in 2000,
the reason that it was so impactful isn't just because it was good. It's because of the position that Radiohead was in for whatever they ended up doing, pulling the rest of the mainstream audience with them.
Right.
That's the key. They were poised to make it that their next step was wherever music would go. And they ended up making Kid A. And I think that is one of the most important, just like not even strategic, but artistic moves that a band in their position could make, because they brought the mainstream with them wherever they were going. And look at what has happened to music in the last 15 or 16 years.
Right.
It's gone in the direction that Radiohead pulled it.
That is rather ambitious, because you can imagine this large fan base that they had gathered and probably alienating a good percentage of that, switching into a taboo area. Are they risking their fan base to do something of their own? Fleetwood Mac, of course, fits into this when we talk about Rumors and going into Tusk. 4 million of their fans technically went with them into that double album.
Well, they were willing to front the money to go along with it. You don't know how many, after they got to that point, said, never mind.
That's true. Although we did see how many of their kids took that influence and went with it. So certainly if they didn't, then their kids did. When we look at the business side of things as well, which we're going to do with these examples, how willing is the record company or people with money who are financing this project? How willing are they to go through with this? And is there a compromise that has to take place in order for this thing to be made?
Yeah, I mean, you think about the way companies, corporations grow. You get to a large enough point, they tend to be adverse to risk once you get to a point. When you're smaller and you have less to lose, you go for those big risk scenarios hoping for a big payoff. And if you don't get anywhere, then, well, it was never meant to be. But once you're up to the highest level, it's, well, we need to pump up the calculated stuff here.
Right. So that helps answer the question of, is this stupid or is this brave? Right. So I think the best thing to do is, before we get to examples here, is break down the structure of how I go into these examples. And I have some questions that we're basically going to answer as we talk about these examples.
Okay.
And it has to do with different parts of an ambitious project. It starts with the idea of the environment. What had the artist released previously, if this is another effort from a band who's already established, or could also be if they are brand new? What was the impetus of the project? So what was happening around them? What gave them the idea to do something entirely different and ambitious for them? That goes into what made the project unique. What was creative about that particular project, or what did the artist think was creative about it? After that, you cannot take away the fact that this thing has to be advertised in order for people to buy into it. So how was it advertised? Was there any kind of hype involved? What were the expectations of their fan base or from people who heard about this thing coming out? Then we have the idea of, how was it received? Did it do well? Did it sell? Was it popular? Did the fan base appreciate it or the reception? What do the artists themselves think of the work? So this is based based on reflection. Was it actually worth pursuing? Because, of course, there was a lot of risks involved. Maybe a lot of bridges got burned from it, too. And lastly, does it have a following today? Is there a legacy behind it? Certainly, in some of my examples, there are certain projects that really burned the last bridge and we never heard from them again.
Right.
Or some cases where it actually spurred their creativity and had them go in a completely different direction and benefit from that. That's going to bring us to our first example, which is the Flaming Lips. For any new listeners to Low Fidelity who haven't heard the previous iteration of it back in 2010, we had done a review of the Flaming Lips Soft Bulletin, and that was released in 1999. What I want to do, though, is actually look at the album that came before the Soft Bulletin, basically what prompted that wonderful album being made, and that was 1997's Zaireeka. Now, before we get into the album itself, I want to talk about the environment, right?
Yep.
Our first topic. If we rewind a little bit back to 1993, Flaming Lips put out an album called Transmissions from the Satellite Heart. I love that album. I think it's got a lot of great rock songs on it, and they had one hit with it called She Don't Use Jelly, which is probably still their most popular radio hit.
I know a girl who thinks a ghost. She'll make you breakfast, she'll make you toast, but she don't use butter, and she don't use cheese, she don't use jelly or any of these. She uses Vaseline.
It was considered this one-off, one-hit wonder alternative rock thing, fitting within the weird college rock area.
Yeah, that happened to a lot of bands at the time where they have big fan bases that truly adore the entire discography. There just happened to be one song that hit on pop radio at the time that if you're not part of that group, that's the only thing you know about. And I feel like it's disingenuous to consider that a one-hit wonder because there truly is so much more to the band.
And especially on that particular album, it's such a shame that the other songs weren't hits because there were some really good songs on that album. Warner Brothers, however, certainly didn't see them as more than a novelty because of the nature of the song. It's kind of got these weird lyrics to it. Mm-hmm. And this only got further compounded with Clouds Taste Metallic, the next album that they put out. I believe that one was in 95. And that didn't do well at all. They didn't have any singles from it. It was basically a waste for the record company. So, of course, Warner Brothers is not going to look at them with such a great light as they did when their original hit came out. So what happens afterwards? Well, the guitarist Ronald Jones quits the band. There are certain accidents that happened to the band members, like Michael Ivins. He survived a car accident where a tire went completely through his windshield, and Stephen Draws, his hand got infected. This all forces the band to go in a different direction. Wayne Coyne, who is the lead singer of the Flaming Lips, had this idea of recording these bits of music onto separate tapes. And so one tape would have a drum, one tape would have a guitar, one tape would have samples, etc., etc. He made 40 of these. He then called on his buddies to bring their cars with working tape decks into a parking garage, and he gave each of them a tape. And he said, on my signal, press play.
So it's like this super stereo surround sound going on. Depending on where you stand, you're going to hear different elements or overpowering elements. Sure.
Or where your car is exactly.
Yeah.
These experiments happened a couple of times, apparently, and it would create, quoting here, a strange, fluid 20-minute sound composition. This obviously wasn't like a money-making scheme. This was just really pure curiosity.
Right.
If not a little bit of self-indulgence.
You think to the classic Wizard of Oz thing here. I mean, that's the standard example of let's sync up two things and see how it works. And this feels like it takes it and runs with it in a different direction.
So considering that they may have seen this as a successful project, they decide, okay, let's go to the record label. We have an idea. I consider that pretty ballsy.
Well, at this point, that's another one of those, well, we have nothing to lose. I mean, our band, I don't want to say is in shambles, but we're having issues and our commercial success is not where maybe we want it to be, / we sort of kind of approached briefly. So let's go for it.
Yeah, but do you go to the record label with the idea of 100 CDs and a box set?
Well, you go in looking for a compromise.
Yeah, right, exactly. I think that's what they were looking for. Although if you ask Wayne, no.
That's what he always wanted.
The end product was absolutely nothing compared to what he wanted. He wanted 100 CDs and a box set. And of course, Warner Brothers said, oh my God, you have to be kidding me. I found this interesting in the Wikipedia article. Basically, the band manager, Scott Booker, researched the cost to produce a box set and then used that number to calculate how many copies sold would get Warner Brothers to make their money back. That's a really smart idea. He's looking from the perspective of the record company here.
Right.
And saying, look, this is not a lose-lose for you. If we make the money back by producing this many, then what's the risk?
What they basically did here, they did a crowdfunding campaign for it to guarantee. This is everything we see with albums and especially video games today, where there's so much more we could talk about. The way that games handle their Kickstarters. And I don't think you're really going to make a game for that much money. But they did a similar thing where it was, all right, we are going to source our fans and guarantee guarantee you this many pre-sales, so what do you have to worry about?
And that's exactly what happened here. They decided the number was 12,000. If that number sold, Warner Brothers got their money back.
Yep.
No big deal. You don't have to do a major marketing push because we did this crazy thing.
We've already done it for you.
It's gotten around. They ended up getting 14,000 pre-orders. So right off the bat, they got their money back. Now, this got boiled down. Of course, we didn't say this before, but this did get boiled down to 4 CDs in a box set. And the idea is that you have 4 CDs that you play at the same time. That's your experience. That is Zaireeka. So that's having to do with the environment. Now let's get into what makes this project unique. What is the creativity behind this? The title Zaireeka is a combination of the terms Zaire, the country in Africa, and Eureka, that moment where you get an idea. Mike, what I want you to do is I'm going to have you read what Wayne Coyne said in the liner notes to Zaireeka about the Zaire connection.
All right. One day while on tour in Europe, somewhere we were driving and listening to the news of the day on the radio. I remember a newscaster with a British accent saying these ominous words. Civilization as we know it is breaking down at a phenomenal rate. He was talking about Zaire, in Africa. And I thought to myself, what if we were actually driving around and playing shows in Zaire instead of Europe? What would you play to an audience whose civilization was breaking down? Since then, to me, the word Zaire has always been synonymous with trouble, and it made me think that people who have touted the idea of anarchy as the ultimate solution obviously have never really experienced it. If they had, I'm not so sure they would like the idea of sleeping in the woods, being bit by insects, nothing to eat, nothing to drink, sick and scared to death, with a past there is irretrievable and a future that is unseeable. Perhaps your family is dead, or maybe you yourself are waiting to die. That's the kind of paralyzing chaos I think of when I hear you long for the days that seem ordinary and boring.
So let's combine this with the idea that they were tired of being this traditional rock band or just being a noise rock band for the sake of being a noise rock band. They themselves notice the change and they see this environment that's in chaos. And I really do appreciate the point he brings up about anarchy, where he says, yeah, you can ask for anarchy, but that doesn't mean you know the ramifications of what anarchy is. And so this whole idea really changes the framework of who they are. Let's add in as well that this is the point where Stephen Drozd upgrades or promotes himself from being just the drummer to a multi-instrumentalist. So you've got this revitalization of talent. You have this focus on different kind of lyricism. So it's no longer about a girl who uses tangerines to color her hair. Now it's about devastating topics that affect real lives. Having said all of this, let's take a few moments to listen to a part of track 1 from Zaireeka.
Track one. This is CD number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4.
That was track 1 of Zaireeka. Okay, I'll admit I really don't understand. A bit different from what She Don't Use Jelly sounds like, I think.
Yeah, but this is one of those legacy things. In retrospect, yeah, this is Flaming Lips, sure.
Right. I think the same thing, where it's so weird, but it to me doesn't sound not like the band. It actually does sound like a progression from what they were into this new form. The idea that you're having these noises on 4 separate CDs, there's a lot of creativity to this. Fact of the matter is, this isn't really produced to be played together, like we just gave the sample here, of course, which is mixed together. But that's not the original intent. In fact, the first couple seconds you hear, this is track 1, CD1, CD2, etc. You're hearing there is this, I would say, intangible goal of getting everything to sync, but that's never really possible if you're doing it with 4 CD players, which is the intended way to play this. You're forcing people to come in with 4 CD players to press play at the same time, which can never happen. Like, you can never actually get 4 people to perfectly hit the play button.
Right. And every device is ever so slightly different. So
Exactly. The laser's going to be off just a tick here and there. The listening experience essentially is going to be different every time you try to play this. And the other thing is you can't listen to this by yourself.
That's the super cool thing about it. It makes it a communal experience. And that's something we have that in live shows, but this makes you an active participant in it at the same time.
And what a genius idea on the part of the Flaming Lips, because I've been to their concerts before. I've, of course, been a fan of their music, and they are very inclusive. They actively try to get people involved with their music and not just be passive listeners, whether that be them trying to grab a huge audience in their lyricism, which I think Soft Bulletin does very well, to generally being very exciting, very off the wall, and a little bit gross and violent in the case of their live shows. But that is their whole MO, is just to have a deeper connection with the audience. And it really starts here with Zaireeka. And I feel like they actually do a brilliant job of stating that intent going into the later part of their career. Mike, how do you think this album did, besides the initial 14,000 pre-orders?
I see it as, I'm going to guess. I've done a little bit of reading on this album, but not enough. We're going to get to the critical reception. I think fans overall pretty much welcomed it and had an okay time with it.
Yeah, and then critics.
Let's get into it. I mean, there's a specific review that is constantly trotted out. No matter what you do with regard to this album, you will see Pitchfork mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. Pitchfork in their early days in this case. The reviewer, his name was Jason Josephs. He gave it a 0.0 rating. And the quote that I love from it is, "Do I want to buy 3 more CD players with which to enjoy Zaireeka or, say, eat?" Let alone the fact that it's obvious this guy doesn't have any friends.
Yeah.
Because that's the point. Like, he's reviewing it as a single approach. He can't do that. Mark Richardson, who is one of the lead editors of Pitchfork, you could say he redeemed Pitchfork a little bit later by writing the 33 and the Third series book on Zaireeka. So maybe that was his way of saying, no, you're doing it wrong.
Well, I mean, who's to say that you're interpreting art wrong? I mean, at some point it is ultimately up to the consumer to really say, like, all right, this is what I'm getting out of it. This is the way that I'm going to attempt to enjoy it. To tell someone, oh no, you're listening to it wrong. Well, no, I bought a product and I brought it home and I'm here to consume this product.
That's what I want to bring up about ambitious projects as well. What it asks of the listener to do, because do you blame the person who their usual experience is they buy or stream a piece of music, they listen to it in their headphones or in the car or from the phone speaker and say that it's terrible?
I can't understand the lyrics. I don't hear the bass here. Well, it's like you're playing it off of your phone in 2 rooms away. That's not my fault.
Right. So there's a little bit of balance between, is it the listener's fault for not doing it the way the artist intended, or is it the artist's fault for not capitulating to the quote unquote normal way to listen to music? I think with ambitious projects, if you're going to not to give into that need of following the trends of your average listener, I mean, that's alienating.
Yeah, you're just going to have to suck it up at that point, that there's going to be a response that is folks not willing to go that extra distance. On the other hand, if you're the consumer there and you're aware of / recognize what this product is, you're going into it with that knowledge that I need to do more with it than simply sit down, press play, and that's the experience.
Especially when it comes to 4 CD players.
And if you're a paid professional reviewer, you expect that at that point they are going to do more than simply bring it home, sit down, and decide they don't want to listen to it the correct way.
Granted, when it comes to the opinions of fans, you'll see those who have been part of the communal experience say that it's a wonderful experience, that the music says so many things. That leads to some of the good reviews that you'll see come out from this. Enemy gave it a 10 out of 10. That's not something to pass off. That's pretty remarkable. It really depends on your experience with the music, and treating it like a traditional listening experience is just not the way to look at it. In fact, if we ever review it on the show, you better guarantee we're going to be doing the 4 CD method, because there's no point in doing it mixed together. It just wouldn't be the right way to go about this.
Oh my God, where would we go to do that?
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. But I'm destined at some point we're going to try it, because I'd love to see what that experience is like. I've never done it myself. Reflection. Let's take a look at what Wayne Coyne has to say about Zaireeka.
It was absurd. And we embraced it, and I still think it stands as an insane achievement, an insane record, and it's even been put out on vinyl now, which doesn't really work in that way. CD players are easy to engage and but people embrace the idea that you have to be involved in it and you have to place the needles or engage the CDs all at the same time. And it's kind of the audience participation element of the parking lot experiments and engaging the CD players. All that seemed to work together, and it kind of, I think, made us a different type of group, or we believed, and it elevated us or changed us into a different type of group. So we're no longer, trying to be this four-piece, loud, weirdo rock group. We had just become this other thing. And I think that really worked for us. Steve and I had talked about being not frustrated, but just kind of bored with, why do we always have to just be a rock group? And I think that record and us abandoning our own, the identity that we had made and just becoming something else, I think allowed us to make a record like the Soft Bulletin, which we never would have done with any confidence or anything if we hadn't just decided that we didn't care what we thought we were, and no one knew what we were, and no one cared about what our identity would be. And I think it really helped us.
Sounds like he's thankful for the opportunity, truly enjoyed the project, ultimately a fun experience, and gratitude to be able to do it.
In terms of how you're going to listen to this, you really do have to get the 4 CD version.
That's great.
There's no way around it unless, of course, they decide to redo it for phones. We'll see what happens. But before we move on to our next example, let's just take a look at the legacy of Zaireeka. I'm going to play a little bit from this video published in 2009, coming from this conference called Ignite NYC, which is basically like a collection of geeks getting into a room and discussing things. And so this improv comedian, Charlie Todd, his 5 minutes and 20 slides have to do with Zaireeka. We're going to play a little bit of it so you can hear what he said.
All right, thanks, guys. I'm not going to talk about Improv Everywhere or Improv today. I'm going to talk about the Flaming Lips, which is my favorite band. This is the best album of all time. It's called Zaireeka. It's on 4 CDs. It came out in 1997. The catch is you have to play all 4 CDs at the exact same time on 4 separate CD players. So why is that awesome? Because you have to have a party in order to be able to listen to it. You have to have 3 people come over, probably bring a couple of boom boxes unless you have 4 stereos, and you need them just to be able to press play simultaneously. How do you throw a Zaireeka party? The first thing you need to do is get the album. They originally only released it limited edition in 5,000 copies. That's all they could talk Warner Brothers into doing. But now it's been re-released. You can get it on Amazon for $18. I recommend actually getting it rather than downloading it because it's a nice package. Now you got to get 4 boom boxes, or you can use stereo or an iPod dock or whatever you might have. I think because of the boombox experiments, it's probably intended to be played on boom boxes. You could use the Best Buy method of going and getting 4 boom boxes and returning them the night after your party if you want to. Pick your space. You want to have a room that's probably square because you want to have your speakers or your sound sources in all 4 corners of the room. A rectangle can be a little awkward for that. And you want to have all of your friends at the party sitting in the middle, which can be a little bit weird because most apartments aren't designed that way. But you don't have to do your apartment. Maybe you can rent a space to throw this party.
I will make sure to link that video in the show notes so you can watch the full 5 minutes. 5 minutes, 42 seconds, I think, of that. Actually, some really good information in there.
Yeah, great advice. Well, I guess the question after consuming all of that information, really talking about the album, the reception, the legacy, was it stupid or brave? It was both. I think, yeah.
Even Wayne himself will say that.
And
yes.
I know that's kind of a hack way to end up answering the question, but I think it definitely is. It was definitely stupid from the, we're going to do 100 CDs and this is my idea, man. Like, it was never going to happen. But it was a brave idea. This isn't something that people do with music. That really feels like a 2018 idea, doesn't it? It's so ahead of its time.
Ahead of its time, innovative, something that's so completely out of place of 1997.
Yeah.
But for 2018, yeah, I agree. Makes perfect sense, but only because we have things like 5.1.
Yeah.
And I think we didn't get to that part in the excerpt we play in this episode, but he mentions there that there's this bootleg 5.1 mix that some fan did. And that's really a great way to do it.
I think that's what Wayne and the others were looking for out of this, though, was this communal experience, this the fans taking it upon themselves to really get in there and mess with the music a little bit and really see what makes the music tick there. That's great.
Now we move on to our next example, which is going to be Guns N' Roses' Chinese Democracy. This album was released in 2008 after having been...
Was it? I don't remember.
I know. It's supposedly 10 years old this year.
It's crazy.
Crazy. So supposedly it took 14 years to get into listeners' ears at this point.
It's one of those projects where did it really, because how many times did it start and stop and scrapped and started all over again? Sure.
And people are fed this image of Axl Rose, the lead singer, and how temperamental he is,
Right.
and the way he throws away projects or throws away band members, and he takes the name and all this other stuff, and you hear the news, but at some point within those 14 years, Chinese Democracy was a joke. We'll ease our way into that, but let's start with the environment around the project first. Guns N' Roses, if you've never heard of them, had an incredibly successful run of albums, starting with their legendary debut in 1987, Appetite for Destruction.
Yep.
On that album, you had Axl Rose, the vocalist, lead guitarist / rhythm guitarist Izzy Stradlin, bassist Duff McKagan, and drummer Stephen Adler. There'd be some drama in the band going through their career, but they put out some really incredible albums. Of course, Appetite for Destruction is known as one of the best debut albums ever released.
Sure.
Use Your Illusions 1 and 2 had some great hits on it.
You want to talk about just ambitious right there. It started there, and you could see what the future was going to be for Guns N' Roses after Use Your Illusion 1 and 2.
In 1994, this is a year after the release of The Spaghetti Incident, which is basically just a covers album. The band started to work for material for the next project. I believe at this point already one of the original members had been kicked out and a new person came in, so this was just the start of that, but really the work that went into this new project was what strained the relationship between Axl and Slash and some of the other band members, and at some point they just left because they couldn't handle it anymore, leaving Axl with the Guns N' Roses name. Was this a conspiracy to get the Guns N' Roses name for himself so he can go full force into his own projects?
Yeah.
This doesn't help his image. This was already after he had jumped on a fan in a concert. The video of that made it into one of their own music videos, adding to this violent image of the band and Axl Rose in particular. Having all of these different band members coming in and out, I mean, the image of that, or at least hearing the news about that, really put a bad taste in your mouth.
I hate to make a video game comparison, but the thing that immediately comes to mind for me,
Duke Nukem
Forever, which was a project that had started and stopped, and I love the pre-order example that someone had from the original version that they used to pick up the final version. I mean, spanned like 3 generations of consoles, an entirely different company ended up picking it up and finishing it. They're basically the exact same projects in 2 different mediums. Whereas, does this thing truly exist? People have seen it, but does that truly exist? Is that fake?
Kind of the same thing we're seeing here with Chinese Democracy, where we've got more band members coming in and leaving, producers and engineers coming in and leaving.
And stuff just getting thrown out. Like, well, was that ever a song? There's no proof of like this thing existing. What is Chinese Democracy?
Very true, because a lot of the original material that Slash and Dizzy and some of these other guys were doing was thrown out and having to be redone entirely with a brand new set of band members. There are actually some really big names being put into Guns N' Roses and sent out. One of them being Buckethead.
I always think of Buckethead as like actually a member of Guns N' Roses.
I would say the same thing, even though that's only been a short period of time. Also, Brian, or Brain, as he's more commonly known, Mantia. He's a great drummer. Also, Tommy Stinson, the bassist of The Replacements, was in Guns N' Roses for a time. Just to kind of give you a hint as to the history of the project, you look at the liner notes, because there are 12 people credited as Guns N' Roses. That's including Axl Rose. And there are 5 listed as additional musicians as well, of course.
Okay.
But then look at the producers and arrangers and engineers. 44 people.
Wow.
That's insanity.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not like a pop album where a pop star goes to different writers, goes to different producers to get a certain sound and whatnot. This is a band who commonly it is just one producer or one engineer for them.
Right.
And here's 44 in this one project. Moby, by the way, who has been said to have done a little bit of work on it, isn't listed there.
That's right.
So you've got these really odd names coming in with Guns N' Roses, and it's really changing the image of the band, because you're thinking, oh, they're this core group. But when you see this rotating line, you see these unconventional choices in band members and producers. I mean, that's warping the idea of what Guns N' Roses is. But that's just all of the stuff that we're hearing, also leading to the hype and marketing and the controversy surrounding the album.
Yeah.
We're going to get to more of that in a little bit. But before we do, I want to take it over to the creativity of this album. What is the point? What is the main statement? And what I have here is a bit of audio from one of the live shows of Guns N' Roses, where Axl Rose talks about the idea behind Chinese Democracy, where he came up with the idea. And surprisingly, he articulates it really well, considering he's in a rock concert. And you'll hear the audience is egging him on to go to the next song. But at some point, they just quiet down to listen to what he's saying. Mike, go ahead and play it.
You know, right Right before I came here, when I left LA, the movie Kundun was on about the Dalai Lama. I kind of like the idea that we're playing the House of Blues because it's kind of associated with that. That came about. I was at the House of Blues in Chicago when Vegas called. You want to do a warm-up gig for Rio at the House of Blues? And sure. So, I was getting ready to leave, and the TV was on, and it was the end of the movie, and the Dalai Lama is about to cross over the border, to be in exile for the rest of his life from his own country. And he looks back at the men who helped him, escape the Chinese government. And he looks back at them and he waves, and they wave at him. And then they show a scene where he looks back at them again and he sees every one of them dead. Because he knew that they would be killed. They knew that in helping him they would be killed. And the emotion in this next song, that's all that's about it. It's not like an intelligent song. It doesn't have the answer to anything. But it's the title track of the record, which, God willing, we will finish. And it's not necessarily pro or con about China. It's just that right now China symbolizes one of the strongest, yet most oppressive countries and governments in the world. And we are fortunate to live in a free country. And so in thinking about that, it just kind of upset me.
That was some audio from a concert at the House of Blues in New Year's Eve 2001, really talking about the concept behind the song Chinese Democracy and then the later album. I love this quote, first of all, because you can hear him very clearly.
Yeah.
Credit to the person recording the audio there. But also, he really took this seriously, the idea of the story of the Dalai Lama being exiled from his home country. It's weird, but I guess interesting in a way that I wouldn't say it was the concept of the album that was ambitious, let alone the controversy that was around it that made it ambitious. The fact that this thing couldn't be done because supposedly he was never happy. And so you had to have these rotating characters in order to make what he felt was the right album for this concept.
It felt like he was searching for the album the whole time. He was the one looking for it.
And one fact I forgot to mention earlier, $14 million to produce this thing.
Right. It was very expensive.
Yeah. Still, I believe the most expensive rock album ever made. I want to go into the story of one particular member within this rotating cast of characters, and that is Buckethead.
Yeah.
Certainly because you could say visibly he's the most memorable. It's really his story that I feel paints an interesting picture behind what's going on in the band and the public perception of what's going on in the band as well, if you're paying attention. Now, just to bring in some background on Buckethead's involvement, if you've never heard of Buckethead before, he is this legendary, prolific guitarist, an incredible soloist.
Mm-hmm.
And as of this recording, he has released 304 studio albums.
Isn't that insane? I know, he's so prolific.
Incredibly.
It's crazy.
He has another slated for the spring of 2018. This is not even counting his work with Viggo Mortensen, yes, the guy who played Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, and Les Claypool, legendary bassist in his own right, many other artists of music he's worked with. In terms of his inclusion with Guns N' Roses, though, I think the way that most of us learned about his existence was from the 2002 MTV Video Music Awards.
It's still so visible in my memory.
Yeah, very much so, especially because...
I was still watching that in 2002?
I guess so. Well, I don't remember watching it live, but I had heard about
Maybe in
the
retrospect,
fact. Well, they were saying in hyping up the event that there was going to be this band reuniting and it was a big deal. They were going to have this new form and you had no idea who it was. I think it's the last few minutes of the award show. Here comes Jimmy Fallon saying,
MTV has asked this next band to perform at the VMAs for like the past 4 years. Well, tonight, not only did they show up, they're even taking requests. I feel kind of weird introducing one of my favorite bands of all time. I just wanted to say, please, it's been great hosting the VMAs here in New York City. This is the best city in the world. And if anyone lives here, you know how powerful it is and how electric and how energetic and the greatest city in the world. For those of you who don't live in New York, welcome to the jungle. Ladies and gentlemen, Guns N' Roses!
we're all looking at Buckethead like, what is this
that?
guy? With the KFC bucket on his head, the
white
mask on.
Yeah.
Crazy. And doing some really incredible solos.
He was great. So yeah, it was us being blown away on multiple levels there.
So that's how we learned about this guy, and just incredible. He'd already had a couple of albums at that point. It was really in the 2000s where he was doing hundreds of albums. His involvement raised a lot of eyebrows, of course, so why was he kicked out, right? On this podcast, Appetite for Distortion, episode 31, I have to say, I've been listening to this podcast pretty consistently since listening to this one episode because it's really entertaining. A lot of great info behind some of the mystique on the band. But episode 31 is really interesting in particular because it has to do with, well, the name of the title of the episode gives it away, the real story behind Chinese democracy.
Sure.
And so you have these hosts, their names are Brando and Scotto. They interview this guy simply known as Walker, who claims to have a lot of inside info behind Guns N' Roses during the Chinese democracy period. And he's going to explain what happened to Buckethead. Let's give it a listen.
Bucket and Fink left for pretty much the same reason, and that was because the label had gone, or not the label, the management team had gone behind Axl's back and told Buckethead one thing and told Axl one thing and tried to stir up a fight between the guys just to get the guitar player out to leave a spot open for Slash to get back in.
Oh, my God.
Well, I do know that Axl put out a press statement in 2002, or no, it was 2004. They were scheduled to play the Rock in Rio Festival in 2004, and Buckethead's health issues, and I'm guessing it may have been the heart issue, forced GNR to cancel the show. Management had gone and told Axl that it was for the reason that Buckethead was leaving. Axl put out a press statement that said the reason we're canceling is because Buckethead it hurt Buckethead's feelings, so he actually did quit. And then, Axl finds out years later, oh, well, the management was lying to me the whole time.
Now, this paints an interesting picture of what we already know at this point about Axl Rose, or what we think we know about Axl Rose, him being this really challenging person to work with. He has his own ideas. He goes 100% with them. If you're not with him, you're out. But this really puts a spin on it where you're hearing, no, the management may have sabotaged a little bit of this to make room for Slash to come back in, which would make a lot of sense, honestly, from a commercial standpoint. And again, this isn't verified information. This is coming from a source who is a bit of an enigma. But still, what an interesting take on things. And this is, of course, coming after the fact. This podcast was recorded in November of 2017. So relatively recent in comparison to the album's release. I want to clarify on a few things because I feel like there's a little bit of muddling going on there in the story. He mentions the heart thing. What that's referring to is Buckethead's heart arrhythmia, which is basically a heart that beats out of step or just a weird tempo to the heartbeat. Unfortunately, those problems have only been getting worse. He's not in the best of health nowadays. He has a recent podcast, I believe, and I don't know the details of this, but put it in the show notes, where he does an interview and actually speaks basically in an interview for the first time about his health issues. That is going to apparently be an issue, maybe, with why he doesn't play Rock in Rio, but that's not what they tell Axl. So Mike, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you read the statement that Axl wrote after the cancellation of their performance at Rock in Rio. This is Lisbon in 2004. This is slightly cut because there's certain details here that would just make this longer than necessary, but go ahead, Mike, read the rest of the statement.
All right, I get to be Axl Rose here. It's everything I've always wanted in life. The band has been put in an untenable position by guitarist Buckethead and his untimely departure. During his tenure with the band, Buckethead has been inconsistent and erratic in both his behavior and commitment, despite being under contract, creating uncertainty and confusion and making it virtually impossible to move forward with recording, rehearsals, and live plans with confidence. His transient lifestyle has made it impossible for even his closest friends to have nearly any form of communication with him whatsoever. On behalf of Guns N' Roses and myself, I apologize to the fans who plan to see us at Rock in Rio, Lisbon. The festival and its tradition mean a lot to me personally, and I sincerely do not enjoy being robbed by one of our own of the opportunity to be the first artist to play it for the third time. I would also like to express my gratitude to those who chose to embrace Buckethead's role in Guns and support our new lineup. We greatly appreciate Bucket's contributions and remain open to discussions, as there are obviously several issues to resolve. In the meantime, rather than dwelling on the negative, Guns will be moving forward and surprisingly without giving away away any details, this unfortunate set of circumstances may have given us the opportunity to take our recording that one extra step further. Regardless, we hope to announce a release date within the next few months.
Even to me, those last few sentences just have this weird ring to them where it's now we can move forward with recording because this drama's behind us.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, you still didn't put it out until 2008. So what does that say?
Right. So what happened in the meantime there? Yeah.
Not to mention that most of the material on Chinese democracy, what ended up being released, came from Buckethead. Like his takes weren't thrown out. They were basically left in, even though he's no longer in the group when they release it. So that's an interesting turn of events there. All this mysteriousness that is behind this album that has not been released and is constantly being referenced as a joke at this point.
Yes.
Akin to the phrase when pigs fly.
Right.
Right?
That's the thing, that if you weren't around and paying attention to music culture at the time, this wasn't a thing. It was a complete joke. It was Chinese democracy. Yeah, it doesn't exist.
And this is only further compounded by the controversies that would come out after this. So let's get closer to the release date. In 2008, this is June specifically, music blogger Kevin Cogill streams 9 tracks from the then unreleased album on his own website until the server crashes because traffic. Of course. The tracks go on to be pirated and gets him in a heap of trouble with the Universal Music Group. The FBI pick him up and arrest him in August of that year. There's a lawsuit, but it wasn't until 6 years later, and this is coming from Wikipedia, I'm going to quote this here. In 2014, Cogill revealed that he could not be charged for pre-releasing copyrighted material because the court could not prove that the album was being prepared for commercial distribution, stating the U.S. government would have to prove in court that Chinese democracy was really coming, and no one at the RIAA or the label had informed the government that these songs had been lying around for 14 years, only that they had cost $12 million.
That's crazy that this thing was being produced, but it was actually at the point where no one could prove that this was a legitimate product that was coming as a commercial product.
Which shows just the chaos behind the production of the album, right?
Yeah.
The whole reason why we're not seeing it released is because no one's driving the wheel except Axl, who's not saying anything.
Wow.
And that's not all. We go to Dr. Pepper. Mike, I'm going to have you read this text. It comes from the March 26th edition of the New York Post from 2008.
Wow, I get to be Axl Rose. I get to be the New York Post. All my dreams have come true, Jeff. Tired of a world in which Americans idolize wannabe singers and where musicals about high school students pass as rock and roll, Dr. Pepper is begging Axl Rose to finally release this year his 17 years in the making album, Chinese Democracy. The soft drink company's incentive to Axl, the frontman of Guns N' Roses, if he ships the album in 2008, everyone in America, except his strange guitarist Slash and Buckethead, will receive a free can of Dr. Pepper. Quote, "It took a little patience for us to perfect Dr. Pepper's special mix of 23 ingredients, so we completely understand and empathize with Axl's question for the perfect album," said a company spokesperson. Dr. Pepper is asking fans to lobby Axl to drop the album already.
That is just one example of one news outlet talking about this. There were many other news outlets that reported on it. Dr. Pepper was serious about this, and Axl was somewhat interested as well, is what it sounds like. So they went through with it. The album release was November 23rd, 2008. Dr. Pepper was ill-equipped to handle the demand for free soda, apparently. And so their website went down because that's where they were handing out the coupons for free Dr. Pepper. In a letter to Dr. Pepper, Rose's lawyer, Alan Gutman, said, "The redemption scheme your company clumsily implemented for this offer was an unmitigated disaster, which defrauded consumers and, in the eyes of vocal fans, ruined Chinese democracy's release."
It was their own fault, wasn't it? Like if you just released it.
Yeah, kinda. Axl later said in an online interview that his lawyers jumped the gun. It was really a non-issue and whatever, no big deal.
Like he was okay with it, just whatever. It seemed like he was overall, for all the behind the scenes nonsense we heard about it, Axl came to be in on the joke as years went on.
Right.
Like he recognized it.
We're still not done with the controversy. This album was banned in China because duh.
You don't say, Jeff.
Yeah, no kidding. The labels behind electronic musician Ulrich Schnaus sued for copyright infringement because they said that samples of his music appeared in the album. Various stories of other forms of sabotage and mismanagement. A lot of it addressed in the Appetite for Distortion podcast, by the way. Definitely check out the episode. You'll see more of these details there. But man, does this thing have a story. But let's move on to the reception. How well did this album do? Now, it's not to say that this album didn't do well. It actually did pretty well. It went platinum. It received generally positive reviews. To kind of generalize the sound behind Chinese Democracy, this is Guns N' Roses going into nu metal and industrial rock, and leaving the hair metal, some of the punk behind, and going into a more conceptual territory. but it's the change of times and it's the digital production coming in, really. You could blame the delay of the album on the changing technology too, technically, right? But regardless, Metacritic, which does a score aggregate from critics, has a score of 68, which is generally good. That's coming from 28 critics, though most of these scores fit within the mixed category.
Yeah.
Generally positive, but a lot are mixed. The album would go number 1 in the European top 10. It would be number 1 in places like Australia, Canada, Finland, Poland, Taiwan. In the US, though, with the Billboard 200, it hit number 3. In terms of what critics were saying, Ann Powers of the Los Angeles Times called it a cyborgian blend of pop expressiveness, traditional rock bravado, and Brian Wilson-style beautiful weirdness.
Why is Brian Wilson on every episode of this podcast?
No, you're right. We have said his name before. Oh, that's funny. Meanwhile, in another review.
So, Rob, I'm going to say Rob Harvia here, The Village Voice. He references the super pack credits here. This is the mythical burrito, microwaved by God, that's so hot, God himself cannot eat it. A lost cause taken to delirious extremes. A fascinating catastrophe, inspiring equal parts awe and pity. A would-be Hollywood blockbuster, upstaged by its own credits. This is beautifully written there, by the way. It doesn't say anything about the music.
It doesn't, and that's why I have a problem with it, where you do come to this album with two perspectives. One, with the idea that you've been waiting 14 years for this, so it better be worth it.
You can't not acknowledge everything about it, but you hope someone's going to actually talk about the music a little bit too. And I'm sure there's more to a lot of these reviews, but the fact that the stuff that gets your attention so much isn't about the music that's a little disappointing too.
Now, I mean, even the Ann Powers review, which is semi-positive, but really spotlights what she says, expressiveness more than the music itself. Again, going into the idea of whether this music is good or not, that's really hard to answer.
Yeah.
I got to ask this now, even though we usually save it for the end. Is this stupidity or bravery?
Jeff, it's both.
You think so too?
I think so. I mean, it's so hard to put yourself at this time, even though we lived through it. What was going on in Axl's mind? What was truly going on behind the scenes? What was really holding it up? Was there ever a hold up? Did it just become too big of a monster?
Was it too big of a joke before the actual music would hit ears?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. When did you listen to Chinese Democracy? And have you listened to it since?
At least once.
Have you ever listened to it again?
No.
Nope. I listened to it the one time, said, all right, that was that. And I wouldn't say I was a big fan of Guns N' Roses. I certainly wasn't, but I was knowledgeable about the band. I obviously knew all the singles, even some of the deeper album cuts there. Wow, Chinese Democracy is finally out. It came like a wet fart, man. It just nothing. I think people got closure and didn't really care about the music.
If there was some sort of a self-referencing going on in there, a little fourth wall breaking, but that doesn't happen.
Just some kind of amazing theatrics to it, just some kind of like multimedia event that truly made it more than just an album, because it was just an album.
And why else would it cost $14 million?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you hiring, like the USC marching band to play part of your songs? I mean, where is the money going? So the fact that we don't really hear that, and instead we get industrial rock coming from a band that used to do hair metal extremely well.
Yeah.
That's just
can you even say it's really that band though? Because it's not.
There's no one to attribute the sounds to, because everyone keeps changing. And so you're thinking it's just Axl Rose, and that doesn't help anything. It's just a combination of stuff that really did not go in their direction. To me, whereas Zaireeka, I look at the bravery side of things.
Yeah.
The Chinese Democracy, I really look at the stupidity side of things. But I
can see that.
I can't say that any one particular person is stupid here.
Yeah.
I just feel like the process was stupid, or the controversies that may or may not be true are stupid, because let's say the story was true, that the manager was trying to kick out Buckethead and all these other people to try and get the original members back in. How dumb is that?
Yeah.
Like, what are you trying to do with? I mean, I get that if Slash comes back, you're going to get interest back in the band, but is that really the right way to go about doing it, to lie to Axl and then to make a spot open for these people?
Yeah.
Makes no sense at all. But yeah, I would say in my case, I would go with stupidity, just in general, but there are some really brave moments to it. Now let's talk about the reflection in the case of Chinese Democracy, regardless of what Axl thinks, because whether he's hamming it up in interviews, do we even trust the guy? Because with his history with Chinese Democracy, basically whatever he says, we're not listening to, because we're already programmed to not trust anybody when it comes to Guns N' Roses music, or this album in particular. But here's something interesting. They've been performing songs from this album on tour an awful lot since 2016, which is strange, considering that 2016 was the start of their Not in This Lifetime tour, and it's named that to symbolize Axl reuniting with Slash, the original lead guitarist, and bassist Duff McKagan.
Yeah.
Neither Slash nor McKagan played on the album.
Right.
So that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Here's a tour review from this website called metalsucks.net. I'm going to put it in the show notes. This is dated October 16, 2017. On the most recent leg of the band's reunion tour, they've been almost comically early, with support act-free shows beginning between 7:30 and 8 p.m. The show lasts a little over 3 hours. During that time, Rose smiles, laughs, waves to the crowd, and takes a small bow after almost every song. He does not spend very much time speaking in between numbers, and when he does take a moment to address the crowd, his comments are never hostile and are generally brief. In other words, Axl Rose has finally become the rock star everyone always wanted him to be.
Is that what they wanted him to be? I don't agree with that. I feel like the fans wanted the belligerent Axl Rose forever.
Yeah, I would say maybe I have some issues with that last line, but in terms of him doing a complete 180 of his own persona, that's what seems so hypocritical about the Buckethead press release, because he's saying he's so erratic in his behavior and we can't go on.
Yeah,
dude.
Glass houses, stones, pots, kettles.
Exactly.
Yes.
I could see this totally on Axl Rose as well. Now him having this new outlook, seeming a lot happier, is, and he says this in his post as well, is he just hamming it up for the audience, or is he actually really feeling better about being a rock star? Is that a relief from having this huge project and putting it out there, burying the hatchet with these guys that, they did not leave happy. They left with some animosity, but now they're back and there's this reunion tour. As of this episode, it's still going on. It's slated to end, I believe, in July of this year, but it may continue. In that case, maybe slightly brave for Axl Rose to make this huge thing, because now he's happier than he's ever been.
That's great. You want people to be happy and enjoying what they're doing.
I guess so. There you go. That's the story of Chinese democracy. And that is going to conclude our look at ambitious projects in popular music. Part 1, hopefully we do this again. Mike, I'm sure next time we'll have you bring in some examples. We'll talk about these topics with what you want to bring to the table.
Yeah, there's so many albums like this. I mean, these are two of the, if you're going to talk about this topic, you kind of have to go to them. I mean, there are a couple other very big, obvious examples, but I think maybe we'll fine tune it a little further and talk about smaller, ambitious projects in popular, but kind of less mainstream music too. I mean, you see the creativity out there and the types of things that people have wanted to do. It's very exciting to dig into that stuff. I have so many ideas, Jeff.
Wonderful. And when we get to verbalize those ideas, I want to hear ideas from our audience as well about what they think of these projects. Have you listened to Zaireeka or Chinese Democracy? We will give you opportunities to contact us in a little bit. But first, Mike, I'd say we're done here.
That was our first take on ambitious projects in popular music. Always interested in hearing what you have to say about the albums we review, the topics we have here. Join the discussion on our subreddit or send us your take, feedback at lo-fidelity.info.
Next month on the show, we are going to analyze and review Sung Tongs by Animal Collective. Until then, thank you for listening to Low Fidelity, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.